Okay, well, welcome everyone to our next in our series of international workshops and webinars in education, medical education and clinical education. Al Sadiq International Virtual University presents Innovative Technologies and the Future of Medicine. What does precision and personalized healthcare look like in the future? So today we have Dr. Naweed Syed, and to introduce him, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Hussein Shabi.
Thank you. Well, it's a real honor today to introduce Professor Naweed Syed for our webinar. He's a world-renowned, very eminent neuroscientist and was the first to connect brain cells to a silicon chip, creating the first world neurochip. He's currently professor at the University of Calgary and served as department head for cell biology and anatomy, and the research director for the Hotchkiss Brain Institute. His lab has pioneered several brain chip interfacing technologies. He's at the forefront of this technology. He's received numerous prestigious awards from around the world, including the highly prestigious and distinguished Medal of Excellence by the government of Pakistan and the Canada 150 Medal by the Canadian Senate. He's lectured extensively worldwide, including many times been a keynote speaker for IMI events, and he currently serves as the Director of Education, Research and Scientific Matters for IMI Canada. He has over 130 publications, including extremely high-impact journals such as Nature and Science, and his research has been highlighted in Time Magazine, Discovery Channel, many other news and media. We're very honored to have him. Please post any questions you have on the Zoom chat, and we'll endeavor to ask the questions at the end of the lecture. And without further ado, I want to welcome Professor Naweed Syed.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm honestly honored and indebted to Dr. Shabi Zadi, who is not only an outstanding scholar in his own right, but also a wonderful, wonderful human being. And also, Hussein, for your kind introduction. I'm not really worthy of it. But what Dr. Shabi has asked me to do is to really make life a little bit difficult for everyone and put people out of their comfort zone. So if I could share my screen, please. Okay, here we go. So what I'm going to do today is to actually talk about some of these innovative technologies and what future they might hold in the field of medicine. And I think it's a privilege and an honor to be giving such a talk under the auspices of Al Sadiq International Virtual University, because it will become a beacon of light, as the name actually suggests, that the first university, Islamic university, was actually set up by Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. So it is really very befitting, and it started in Medina as well. So I think having those kind of innovative novel technologies and what they can do in the future to change the face of medicine is very really befitting with this particular topic. So I am from Calgary. Right now it's 8 in the morning, and normally it's a very pretty city. It's beautiful. It is located in the foothills of Canadian Rockies. So if you were to drive on this road for about 10 hours, you will arrive in Vancouver, which is the west coast of Canada. And if you drove towards east, towards yourself on this road for about 3.5 days, you will arrive in Toronto, which is a large city. So it's a very pretty city. Winter Olympics were held here in 1988. This is where English, skier Eddie the Eagle made his name, and also broke a few legs as well. So normally it's our winters are a little bit, dodgy. It can get really cold and a lot of snow. And you could see that often sometimes we have trouble finding our cars, but we are very creative, innovative, and hardy Canadians. We can always find a way. The way really, science and innovation and technology always find this way to safety and well-being. This is a picture I actually took when the morning sun rises from our house in the downtown, and this is also when the moon rises. So it's really very pretty city. To bring you into perspective as to where I am physically. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we are all distant, so we don't know who is coming from. So I am actually from this particular city. Now, the learning objectives for today's session really are, we will talk about health sensors and telehealth. And now these are the technologies that are really revolutionizing the field of medicine. And also, I think, giving heads up to those countries who are lagging behind. And hopefully, I think this will inspire a few people to be able to really start thinking about not the conventional way, the way the medicine was done. Medicine will be done very, very differently in the years to come. So there are lessons for younger generations as well to learn from this. If you are in academia, you really have to think now as to where the puck or the ball is going to be as you are skating or running faster. So if we gave you the ball where you are, by the time you're skating, you're going ahead, you will miss that ball at all, or the puck at. So it's really important to give you what the future looks like. So I will also talk about these things that are, how feasible they are, how close they are in terms of being translated into the field of medicine. And then I will discuss about how affordable they might be, whether it is done or not. So the first part of my talk is to really give you a snapshot of how different technologies are making into the field of medicine. And then the second part will be related to my own research as to how far we have gone taking these technologies and into the clinical practice, and what would it take for us to move them out so all countries, all places in the world have access to them. So I will talk about health sensors and telehealth. And telehealth became even more important in this time of crisis, where you cannot see your patient face to face. And most doctors are actually consulting. And then the healthcares are also linked through telehealth. Then I will talk about genetic testings and gene therapies, how they are really going to revolutionize the diseases which are rare genetic disorders, and how can we actually go in utero, if we could do sampling of a mother's blood to find out whether the child that is yet to be born might have some genetic abnormalities. How can we go in and try to really use CRISPR technologies to cut those genes, faulty genes out of there? And then we will talk about immunotherapies and how these immunotherapies are really becoming essential and important tool. We learned a great deal from COVID-19, where the immunotherapy techniques to tackle cancer, how they were revived or altered, changed in a way to really develop vaccines and whatnot. We will discuss and talk about 3D printing. 3D printing is also revolutionizing the field of medicine, whereby bones, cartilages, even prosthetic devices can be 3D printed and fitted into people or patients, as per precision health or personalized health mandate. And similarly, I think the tools and technologies are also being developed. I will talk about this as well. And then the nanotechnology, how nanotechnology is really changing the field of medicine from your devices that are implanted inside to detect any abnormalities in the human body, and also using this nanotechnology to be able to fix the worst problems. And then virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, where it is in the field, what it is its scope, and how can we actually use it to treat not only brain ailments, but also teach and train our scientists, scholars, doctors, and surgeons to be able to really perform better surgeries and real-time surgeries, or even perform surgeries that are being conducted at a different place using robotic techniques. Excuse me. So surgical and medical robotics is also becoming a really important and exciting thing. So we have some robots that actually wander around the alleys of our hospitals here, even at the Children's Hospital, and they are now replacing many of these medical staff and the staffers, in this light of all the contagious diseases. And also, I think I will tell you where the field of robotic is. And then artificial intelligence. And this particular approach is really important because now using machine learning and artificial intelligence and algorithm, one could really predict looking at pathological symptoms. One could also look at specimens. One could look at specimens that are coming from an MRI or CT, even the radiology, many of these ultrasound images that could be interpreted with exquisite accuracy by using these artificial intelligence devices. So I think this particular area will also be able to really revolutionize the field of medicine as we practice it. And finally, I will talk about brain-computer interfacing and the brain chip implants or technologies. And this is something that we are working on. So, it is really, really important for us not to look at the current practices. I always tell our medical students that, look, Jesus Christ never went to medical school. He could still heal and cure. It's not the MD degree. It's not the MBBS. It's actually passion and compassion and foresight. So it's really important that we think about the changing world now as to where the world is going to be in 10 and 15 and 20 years, and how can we empower our trainees that are coming out of Al-Sadiq University and also globally, because they are the messiahs of the future. How can they be prepared to tackle these challenges that are on the horizon? So Dr. Shabi asked me to make everybody uncomfortable. This is going to be your doctor. So actually your doctor is not going to be one that you visit these days, but Google has become, for example, a fantastic doctor. If I tell you that you are taking this medication and it has these side effects, where would you go? You won't go to your doctor. You will actually go to Google and Google search. And these kinds of approaches and technologies whereby you are making hybrid of human and the machine interfaces, that will become really surgeons. And it's not a science fiction. And I will give you an example. I will actually take you 30 years from now onwards in the future, and then I will bring you back to the reality of the ground as to what's happening.
It takes a moment for the unthinkable to become reality. In the near future, tragedy may come with new choices. Imagine you've been in a car crash that's killed your daughter.
Is she okay? Is she okay?
Or has it?
She's breathing. Is she breathing?
Hey.
Is she okay?
Time of death, 9:17. Your daughter's brain was not impacted by the accident. If you wish to scan her brain for digitization and upload, you have approximately 5 minutes.
Do it.
Now imagine the power you wield when you can order a digital copy of your daughter's brain. And do you know what comes next?
Hi, Dad.
One day delivered to your doorstep is an artificially intelligent android that will act, look, emote, just like your daughter. Every memory from birth on will remain intact, but she'll also be a walking computer with access to all the world's knowledge. This is what your world will look like. This is the future of artificial intelligence. It's the deep future. Your body, gone. You're all computer, all the time.
So this is really still sounds like science fiction, but I will now tell you how far we are in terms of getting there and what are really these technologies that will revolutionize the field of medicine. But it's really important that not investing and adapting these modern medical technologies will be devastating for all developing countries. So it's really important that after COVID-19, we know that the nationalism is increasing. Most Western powers that gave us technologies and the resources and means and also supported us are struggling themselves financially. Those monies will not be doled out. So I think it's important for countries, third world countries, to think about really developing. And I think we need to instill this sense of curiosity and innovation in our young minds so they could become really problem solvers in the future as well. And investing in the knowledge always pays the best interest. So I think this message is really for our governments and our agencies who really think that let someone else develop technologies, we will use it. That's not way forward for the nations and universities and academic centers and countries in terms of to survive in the next century. So, if you look globally in the Muslim world, in Pakistan, for example, 0.2% of the money is actually spent on education, let alone science and technology. And I think entire Muslim world is not more than 0.4%. And I think if our think tanks, if our governments and the agencies do not realize that investment in knowledge always pays the best interest, and people say that, when you educate people, it costs a lot of money, technologies cost a lot of money, to eliminate ignorance will cost you even more. So I think that, frugality really drives innovation, and we are really need to think, the things that got us into this box and has troubled us in this, they are the ones that really are also we going to find our way out of this tight box and invent our way out. And if we don't really push ourselves out of our comfort zone, then many of these disruptive technologies, they're disruptive because they disrupt our normal practices. They disrupt our normal way of practicing medicine and living our lives as well. And so I think, the very same profession that we, kind of are part of to heal and to cure and to eliminate sufferings and make people, healthier and feel better, and we will actually be jeopardizing the very same profession that we serve. So the future of medicine, what does it really look like? I think medicine will completely and already has changed. I was watching a cricket game, and Pakistan was playing against another team, and they needed 6 runs, and there was they needed 5 runs to tie and 6 runs to win the game. And I was sitting, my heart rate was perfectly, 80, 81 at that time. And then all of a sudden they had 1 ball left and they had to score 6er to actually win the game. And my heartbeat all of a sudden shot up to 145, 146. And I got immediate alarm from my Apple iWatch that there is something wrong. You are actually having a cardiac, maybe a defibrillation is needed, or you're having a cardiac issue because your heartbeat just shot up without any, history of you doing any exercise, walking or running. So, these kinds of devices not only will be able to tell your blood pressure, be able to tell your glucose level, and also monitor your health records, everything else. So precision health, even in the hospital setting, will really become a one-stop shop. So whereby everything from pharmacies to actually prescription will become, on the tip of your fingers. So you'll be able to get access to all information, not only just that the patient's current medical history, but also the genetic makeup as well. And then using algorithms and predictability, we'll be able to predict whether this person is really predisposed to any cardiac issues or other brain-related problems later on in the life. So the life was really going pretty good. And then came the coronavirus. And I think a great deal is to be learned from the field of, and for medicine itself. When this coronavirus came, we have never been in our lifetime hit by something like this, which is so devastating. that there is not even a single organ that it doesn't affect, and the long-term impact on the brain and mental health and are also long-term as well. And this pushed all the countries to go from a global village to deglobalization. We are now going through deurbanization. So the world is really going to change enormously. And that's why I think it's important for younger generation to think about themselves and think about developing and adopting these technologies that will be the future of medicine as we speak. So I will begin with that. So, we thought about vaccinating a population. So how would you know that an individual that you're encountering is vaccinated or not? And how can we actually deliver these vaccines without having to have these people come to the hospital? So, these small little chips have been designed and developed. They are very, very tiny. And these chips could be based on nanosensors and biosensors. They could actually simply be implanted between your thumb and the index finger. And they're very, very small. They can carry all your medical record, your medical data, your health history, everything else, even for paramedics to know that whether you have any medical issues or health related issues. On top of that, it can also, take and contain your even credit card information, your address. It could also contain money transfer, bank information, passport, everything else. And these are already have been implanted in people. I think in Sweden alone, there are close to 4,000 people who have this. But the limitation of this particular technology is that you really need a radio frequency identifier to be able to read out. So you could only be a meter or a foot closer to, just like your tap in your credit card. The same thing happens with these devices as well. But I think this is going to really change. So the idea here is that can these devices be used to deliver nanoparticles or nanobeads into a human body, and also monitor the health of an individual, and also monitor their vaccination status as well. Then there are, excuse me, these biosensor technologies, which are really do not require any surgical implants, but they could be actually part of your body in testing your blood pressure, EEG, ECG, and monitoring almost all aspects of your health through these sensing technologies, which are the biosensors. And they could also be used for the elderly patients who really get sometime, disoriented, sometime when they fall and, hurt themselves. If they have, Parkinson's, or if they have Alzheimer's disease, many of these complications, so the family could actually read out their status sitting at home on their handheld device to make sure the wellness of their family member or the elderly. So these biostamps are also really very, they could detect your sugar level, also monitor your cholesterol level, monitor your EEG and ECG, and many other aspects are now being actually becoming part of these biosensor technologies. And then, even in our university, we have been working on these small little capsules, and these capsules could be ingested. They are biocompatible. They are also non-toxic. And once you ingest them, they actually go through your GI tract, and they're monitoring anything in your GI tract that could be wrong. If they see a small little polyp, it can send a signal to the actual radiologist or to a doctor, telling them that I see this large polyp that is developed. Would you like me to take care of it? And it can actually surgically not only extract it, but also put appropriate medication to burn it as well. And this capsule that we have developed is also capable of going through our GI tract to be able to sample all bacteria, because our personality health is microbiome in our guts is really defines all the metabolism, the metabolites that plays a very important role in our health. You could really get samples of different microbial flora within the GI tract, and then try to really determine and analyze that data as to what this person's gut, physiology, biology, and health really looks like. And I think in the future, these similar devices could be turned into, silicon material, and which could be formulated or constructed in the form of a blood cells, and it goes through your blood vessels, and it can test and measure your cholesterol level as well as your the health of your blood vessels. And then if it goes through any of the major arteries, it could really sense how much clogged it is, whether you have been eating biryani too much or nihari, and it clogged up the arteries. So the idea will be that it could then send a proper inside the blood vessel report to the doctor and cardiologist, telling them that, this is what the status is. If you wish, I could put a little stunt and convert myself into a stunt, or you could go in and try to fix the problem. So I think these kinds of devices are becoming a reality, especially they are being used right now for GI interventions, and because it's a much safer way for it to come out. And they will also revolutionize the field of medicine, where the diagnostic actually could go into the hands of a patient as well. Immunotherapies, we talked about, coronavirus, the RNA-based immunotherapy was really designed to use, our own body cells to reprogram them in such a way that they could recognize tumor cells and go and destroy them or neutralize them. But that particular technology has since been used to really develop these mRNA-based vaccines that you are seeing now in the market. And they are really based on those immunotherapy approaches, whereby you can use your own immune system to be able to handle diseases, for example, cancer. So immunotherapy is really becoming an important role, and we learn a great deal about our immunity. And the coronavirus or COVID-19 causes more damage to the lungs, but even more damage is caused by our own immune system, which then causes a cytokine storm, and this storm clogs up the blood vessels, causing strokes and other neurological distances, or COVID feet, and those kinds of things. So I think perturbation and manipulation of our immune system, using them to really tackle these anomalies in the bodies or the abnormalities in the bodies, will be another future applications to go. And then there are different ways that these nanoparticles and nanomedicine could be used. These nanoparticles could be used to actually have the timed release of medicine, that you could really release medication you don't have to take. For the elderly, they forget sometimes, they have Alzheimer's disease. So these particles could timely release medication, in a dose dependent and on a daily basis, and up to a year. But these nanoparticles can also be really programmed in such a way that they have the actual antigen that can recognize a particular antibody or a particular tumor cell kind. And then what they do is that they will bind to it, and then they release the toxins or the chemicals to specifically really hurting or destroying those tumor cells or abnormal cells in our body, to be able to neutralize them without having a chemotherapy or a vast radiation and other aspects of it. So I think nanoparticles combined with nanomedicine will also revolutionize the field of medicine enormously. And I think many of these technologies are going through safety regulations and clearance, and have been really approved for clinical trials. The other important thing to really keep an eye is that the genomics, of the field of genomics with high throughput genome sequencing, has become really a very, very powerful tool to look into rare genetic diseases. So as I said earlier, you could take the blood sample from a pregnant woman, and from that blood sample, you can deduce whether the child that is yet to be born may have Down syndrome or any other diseases. And these technologies are becoming really very powerful and also highly affordable. I remember the human genome, when it was sequenced, cost as close to $2 billion. but now we can sequence the entire genome of human in less than a couple of $1,000s. So I think this genomics, whereby one could not only predict, any future issues that one might have, it has pros and cons, and biomedical ethics, has to, and no one knows better than Dr. Shabi, to be able to really think about how biomedical ethics, will come and play an important role in this particular case, when you know that a person has a cardiac, condition, or is prone to Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, and the insurance companies not insuring them for that particular case, or people not getting married, and those kinds of things. So those are aside. I think science is nothing to be ashamed of. Even in the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, science job is to really advance the field and advance the knowledge. So genomics is becoming a really very powerful technique, whereby you could actually do the whole genome sequencing, and that the actual technology is becoming robust. So what do you do with this data that you get from the genomics? So let's say you got a sample that shows that this child that is yet to be born may have Down syndrome. You opt either not to abort the fetus, and you want to go through. How can you actually invoke these technologies to be able to go and fix the problem in utero? So this CRISPR technology, which is the gene editing technology that is coming in the market, it has actually now, I think, been tested in humans as well, whereby you take the scissors, and these scissors will go and snip out the defective part of the gene, and then either insert the normal part of the DNA into this, or take out that faulty gene. So I think gene editing technique will be a really powerful tool for us to be able to look at all rare genetic diseases, and also other diseases as well. So this is really coming into mainstream medical practices in terms of the genetic technology. Now, so all of this information is really from digital to telehealth, and was limited in terms of our bandwidth, because you could not transfer, or you could not analyze the data fast enough, you could not really store the data enough, and you could not transfer this data from one center to another enough. Coming of the 5G now really allows us to really speed up these kinds of technologies and make them really robust and bring them out in the market. And of course, quantum, and cloud computing is another major, development whereby you can now not only acquire large data sets, but also store them, and using artificial intelligence and algorithms to be able to really predict this. So quantum and cloud computing may not be affordable for certain countries, but it's just like everything else. In the beginning, they're expensive, and then they become really easily affordable. So I think investing in quantum computing and also cloud computing is really an important aspect of linking what happens in a clinic and into the hospital and into a major large healthcare unit, whereby you actually bring all of this together. So these technologies are now being empowered by the bandwidth, which was really the major road block or bottleneck. And I think this will really revolutionize the whole technology enormously. So, because of such a big, huge power bandwidth, we can now do the remote diagnostics and also perform remote surgeries. Because a surgeon sitting in a very different city can operate on a patient who is lying in the operating room in a very different city or even country, because this bandwidth, the power that we have, that was the rate limiting factor, is really now coming under our control. So one could really create these hybrid operating rooms whereby you have a surgeon working together, with other surgeons in a different place, or even a patient in a different place, to be able to really perform surgeries using these hybrid, machine and human operating rooms. Our university really developed what we call intra-operative MRI. Excuse me. In that particular case, I think if you're familiar with Canadarm, this is on the space shuttle. There is an arm that really does many of these magical things on the space station, is based on technology that was developed here. It's called NeuroArm. So what happens normally is that if a surgeon is about to perform a surgery, you take an MRI, you put it on your screen, and then you design your surgery. You go into an operating room. Well, once you open this individual, the situation looks very difficult, and you cannot really see blood vessels around the corner or other things, and people end up really having a stroke, or you do not really remove the tumors, gliomas that are surrounding a particular area because your precision is not really that great. So what our team did was that they developed an intraoperative MRI, whereby you have an MRI machine, you take the patient inside, and then what you do is you send a robot in the magnet. Now, of course, any metallic objects cannot be taken inside the magnet. So we ended up actually developing a titanium robot, and that robot can go inside the magnet. And then when you have live imaging and the robot is controlled with joystick and the software, surgeon sits in a different room, live MRI image is projected on the big, huge screen, and then surgeon actually uses the haptics and this joystick controlled micromanipulator to be able to precisely take out the tumor and even put the sutures back. So these robots are becoming really, robotic surgeries are really becoming the way of the future. And I think once the Al Sadiq University goes online, we will definitely bring one of these systems into the university. And the other thing is that really 3D printing, whereby you can print prosthetic arms, excuse me, prosthetic arms. You could develop really, prosthetic even organs with 3D printing. But what we are using the technology is to actually make a 3D image from an MRI report. And then what we do is that we 3D print that individual's brain, and then using our own, robotic, fully programmed system, design a surgery that can fully operate on that individual with exquisite accuracy. So, 3D printing is another way to really move forward, whereby you can print, hopefully, organs in the future, not right now, but definitely you can print bones and joints that will be really befitting that particular patient. 3D printing tools and tissues are really becoming an important role. As I said, we can actually take an MRI image, we can really redevelop that whole brain in an individual, removing skull and everything else to be able to really then practice and plan surgeries much better. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, as I said, excuse me, is playing a really important role in terms of reading out all of these, MRI reports, CT, radiology, even pathology samples to be able to really design these algorithms, and the machines can learn to be able to really perform important tasks that are becoming hard. Excuse me, it's too early for me. So the other thing is virtual reality. And this virtual reality is really playing a very important role, not only as a teaching and a surgical training role, but it can also allow us to be able to really go inside the patient, to be able to really see as to what is going on. And these virtual reality technologies are also being used to really, treat people who have otherwise been impacted by traumatic, post-traumatic stress disorders, or people who have trauma and other kinds of psychological aspects that are bipolar, schizophrenia, and ADHD kind of things. So in my lab, what we do is that we use this, and we're developing this technology to be able to really look at So what it really does is that it can bring you into a virtual world whereby you can teach not only important medical difficult questions, but you could be so interactive. And if you had PTSD, whereby you can actually reprogram the brain by taking them back into that scenario and then recouping and then bringing them back with healthy approaches. So I think these kinds of technologies, you know, virtual, augmented, and mixed reality is also playing very important, not only diagnostic, but also therapeutic.
Or the solar system. It says it.
So the entire world actually comes on the right in front of you. Entire human comes in front of you, and you could really learn and do things that are otherwise completely difficult to teach them from textbooks and other places. So, you know, this is what the robots is kind of are making their way into hospitals. This fellow you will see wandering around, it not only delivers really, you know, water bottles, sees the patients, and he would clean up, take the garbage, and also if the patient are really infected, you don't put humans at risk. And these robots that are becoming a common practice now in the hospitals to really do menial kind of jobs. And they are becoming really sophisticated as well to take all your vitals as well. So the robots are making a quick entry into hospitals. And then with the development of advanced robotic techniques, we are actually able to also understand a great deal about our own self and our brain through these robotics approaches. So this really brings me to what I do. In the last 10 or 15 minutes, I will really talk about these disruptive technologies that are based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. They will be transformative. They are disruptive technologies because they disrupt the way we do things normally, but they are also transformative because if you're, for example, your brain is damaged either due to stroke, trauma, injury, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, or any kind of anomalies, genetic or otherwise, because natural replacement of damaged brain tissue doesn't take place, there's no way for you to be able to really rectify and cure that problem. So we came up with the idea that the only way we can actually tap into information processing capabilities of the brain and then replace the damaged tissue is to develop these technologies, which are really, you know, brain machine or brain computer interfacing. So when we were thinking about this, people thought that we were crazy. It was a really crazy idea. This is not possible. How can you take a semiconductor chip and then couple it with human biological tissue? They are not compatible. All these kinds of questions still really get posed while you're listening to all the talks. And they are going through your brain that how is it really possible? How can it be done? A biology, you know, interacting with a robot, or biologist or surgeon interacting with a robotic device. And how is it really compatible? Are they compatible? Are they biocompatible? Those are really important questions that send us thinking about that nothing is actually impossible. So we thought of really, I'm going to talk to you about brain computer interfacing first, and then where we are and how far these technologies have come along. And then I will talk about really the brain chip interfacing technology, whereby we are beginning to plant chips in human brain to really understand, not only for the diagnostic purpose, but also for curing and treating it. So one thing, you know, to really remember is that we are natural born cyborgs. You know, brain's ability to modify and modulate itself, it allows us to really attach ourselves to machines, such as computers and electronic tools, quite naturally. So don't be alarmed or afraid that how is it possible for me to be able to connect to an electronic device or a computer? We are actually natural cyborgs. So get this out of your brain that it cannot be done or you cannot do it. You're a human and then you cannot talk to or interact with machine. We are natural cyborg. Our brain really reconfigures itself in response to an input from very simplest tool that we use routinely. So it really you automatically connect with your cell phone is connected with your server is connected with satellite, and we are all connected that way. So we are naturally really connect, you know, on a remotely and naturally. Now, is far more open systems than we ever imagined. Now, you know, this all this biological, you know, our brain is really, really plastic. It links up with just about anything. And I will show you one of these examples. And it survives in the changing world by changing itself. So we have the capability in our brain to be able to adapt to these novel, innovative precision health technologies, but also actually try to be creative in that field because our brain is allowed to do so. So to give you an example, our brain is so adaptive. This young man cannot see his left hand, and in front of him is actually a rubber hand. So every time his own finger is stroked, he is asked to focus on his finger, on the rubber hand, and every time the rubber hand will be stroked, his actual finger will be stroked as well at the same place and in the same motion. And you see what actually happens.
Practice. Here you can see the fake hand focusing on it. There's the real hand not focusing on it, simultaneous stroking. And there are various ways you can test it.
So, you know, these approaches really allow us to be able to really get your mind adapted to an outside world. And let me show you one more time.
Practice. Here you can see the fake hand focusing on it. There's the real hand not focusing on it, simultaneous stroking. And there are various ways you can test it.
So you can see really the adaptability, and using the same, you know, idea, we thought that we could connect brain and human brain with the computer and then see if they can really interact with each other. So we have these little robots, and then the student has these electrodes mounted on the scalp. It's non-invasive. And then whatever he is going to do, the actual monkey robot will mimic all those aspects of it. If he blinks his eyes, opens, and then we can also actually turn the light on and off by just thinking about it. It's no connections. We can bring in young students who have really had no experience, and whatever they will do, this monkey will actually copy them. And then what we do is we train these young minds to be able to control this cube by just thinking about this inside the tunnel. So he can move the cube up and down, left or right, or go deep into the tunnel. And I will show you why this is really important. And there is nothing really he can control his computer by just thinking about it and then connecting his brain to a machine. Here is a car. So this is our brain controlled car. There is absolutely no remote, nothing attached. And you could see that it actually doesn't crash either. So this is a little drone that is also flown by just thinking about it. That thinking process is conveyed and relayed to the little sensors on this drone. We have sensors built onto this drone, which are feeding back to individual, giving the actual position as to where the drone is in space and in time as well, just like your GPS. And then we can actually land it perfectly as well. So none of these devices are remote controlled, but they're actually brain controlled. So it's a brain really controlled a brain computer interfacing technology that are now in place. And we go into the lab, we only think about turning the lights on, and then the actual light will come on. So this is already happening at the ground reality level as well. But the most difficult challenge was that can we now take these technologies to implant these chips directly inside a human brain? And you know that this is really making bionic hybrid is a bit tricky and very difficult. Right now in the clinical settings, we have, as is shown in a panel here, people who have Parkinson's. They did not respond to medication, and the only choice was to actually go in and implant a deep brain stimulation electrode. The patient can stimulate the electrode, it stimulates the neurons, they release the dopamine, and then the symptoms for tremors are really eliminated. But now what happens with the deep brain stimulation electrodes is they're stimulating the brain cells and they're screaming and crying, stop, stop, but there's nobody that actually listens to them. We end up causing excitotoxicity and massive damage to that brain tissue. The other approach really is that where you can use these surface electrodes to detect seizure-like patterns in the brain, but then when the seizures are developed, you can only pick up the activity and there's nothing you could do. So what we wanted to do, as depicted here in B, is to develop a stimulator which can stimulate brain cells non-invasively. And then when this brain cell is activated, it talks to another brain cell. And when that brain cell fires, we have now transistor underneath that will pick up the activity of brain cells. So you actually complete a loop whereby an electronic device can talk to brain and then the brain cells can talk back. So I think this really was a major milestone, and that we are very proud to actually be the first team in the world to do this, because it had never ever been done, where you could stimulate a brain cells, a semiconductor chip was talking to brain cells and brain cells talking back. And we could actually generate memory of these brain cells onto the chip. And that allows us to be able to really, like is shown in C here, when stroke destroyed the connection between neuron A and neuron B, we can actually bypass it using our microelectronics and the biosensor technology to be able to actually fix and activate that pathway still, even though the intermediate pathways were damaged. So really, these technologies are in the place. We developed this incubator that allows us to keep the brain cells alive for days to weeks and months. And this was really prerequisite. Of course, you cannot do these things in the brain. And then we were able to grow these brain cells. A lot of work had gone through to make these semiconductor chips biocompatible, whereby the brain cells could actually be integrated. They grow on it and they love it, and they do not feel a thing that they are not growing inside the brain, rather growing on a chip or some other device. So we can really grow large networks of these brain cells. We can monitor, record their activities for days and weeks and try to understand how these networks come together in the first place. And that allows us to be able to really understand how brain develops, how its connectivity is developed. And so whenever the problem actually happens, we know how it happened in the first place, and we can actually go back and fix it. But these are still cultured neurons. You will say these are artificial. You take a brain tissue, you dissociate them, you throw them on the culture dish, and they develop networks. And two neurons that are connected here may never be connected in the intact brain. So how do you really do this? We went a step forward. We take a brain slice, and then we put the brain slice on our chip, and you could see that the seizure activity that is being triggered at this individual brain cells level, we can really pick up those activity patterns. So we are now recording live from the intact brain tissue, normal or abnormal. In this case, particular one is the seizure-like patterns. And so having gotten this, you would still say that, yes, that's okay. You're recording from brain cells that are making contact with chip, but you know what? Brain is actually 3D. It's a three-dimensional network. How do you then influence neurons that are not in immediate contact with the chip? So what we did was we developed another technique, what we call photoconductive stimulation. We grow these brain slices or individual neurons on these silicon chips. And then what we do is we label these brain cells with the fluorescent dyes. So when they fire or they're activated, they light up like a Christmas tree. We fire the laser through the microscope. It hits the silicon wafer. It changes its properties. And only in that area where the laser hits, you activate the entire population of neuron. And this is really what happens, is that a single laser will trigger a massive activity in these brain cells. And now we are monitoring brain cell firing that is not in immediate contact, but also cells that are sitting in multiple layers in a brain tissue. So where do you go with this? The next idea is to really bring all of these technologies that I talked about, from G5 to quantum computing to nanosensors, bio devices, and then to be able to construct, for example, using technologies such as machine learning, as well as 3D printing. So printing organs that could be really then implanted. So in this particular case, monkey can make an eye contact. His visual cortex makes an eye contact with food palate, and the visual cortex talks to sensory motor cortex. And when sensory motor cortex fires, and if you have a chip that is sitting in that place, now that chip becomes a remote control, because you designed that chip. You also designed this prosthetic limb. You can pair them the way we paired with the brain. We paired the car, and also we paired that drone. So what it allows you to be able to do is to really have an interface between brain and a prosthetic device. And of course, the modern techniques that are moving forward, these prosthetic devices are all based on 5G nanofibers. This monkey can actually play a ping pong. So these experimental testings are really, going through the process. And we wanted to take it for a test drive. As you know, that the seizure detection is our first frontier that we wanted to really conquer. And what happens is we really put together a team of very bright biomedical engineers and surgeons. And we thought that we will develop a novel chip. And normally what happens is that if a child who's seizing and not responding to drugs, that child will then is kind of selected for surgery. And surgeons either place these sensor electrodes on the scalp, or after surgery, they really try to map and figure out where these seizures are coming from. So these electrodes are planted. The child has a 30-foot cable, stays in the hospital for 10 days. And every time the child will seize, they will try to figure out where these seizures are coming from, which is exactly the precise foci. Now, a couple of problems with this particular approach is that these electrodes are really not very accurate. They're not very sensitive. They are also, the patient has to stay in the hospital, cost a lot of money. And also, the stress that is caused to a child by being confined to a hospital room are really enormous. So we wanted to really move out of the way and move away from all of this, where we developed a chip that is completely wireless. Not only that the chip is completely wireless, but it is also MR compatible. So the idea is that you plant these chips inside the brain, have a little dongle that really sticks out as a sensor outside the skull. And we then put this child into an MR scan. The MR will not only provide the exact a tomogram of hologram of the brain, but also juxtaposition of these electrodes inside the brain. So what then it allows us to be able to do is to really, put everything back, send the child home. And whenever this child will seize, these electrodes are 200 to 300 times more sensitive than what you actually see conventional surface electrodes. And once this is really happens, the child seizes, it immediately, the software creates a 3D reconstructed version, and it sends an image to the surgeon on his cell phone that, look, out of 12 seizures that this child had, 11 of them have actually come from this particular area. And this is what your surgical resection plan should be. You should go forward and then take that out. So, you know, these kinds of approaches that are really becoming quite feasible and also, and we can really detect seizures with exquisite accuracy, you know, which is 15 almost to 20 times you know, higher than what commercially available devices. And my last part of the talk is really developing these technologies that allow us for spinal cord injury or nerve injury patients to be able to guide these brain cells using nanotechnologies or the semiconductor technologies. You know, these brain cells grow, they have these growth cones at the leading edge of a neurite that finds its path en route towards target. And so what we wanted to do was to promote regeneration. We actually created this template, which has a whole number of sensor electrodes. We apply in an electric field, and this will really attract this particular single growth cone of a single brain cells towards its target. You know, the idea is that when you have spinal cord injury, the scar tissue becomes really a cement. And even though peripheral nervous system is capable of growing, it cannot grow through them. So what we could do is actually create a detour by making these nanotubes. And these nanotubes are guiding, releasing trophic molecules and also growth permissive signals. And we get these fibers to actually, just like traffic control cop, to guide them one by one and eventually really making sure that there is no scar tissue. So I think with this, I will end.
Hello there. May I ask your name?
Hi there, my name is Ignacio.
It's nice to meet you, Ignacio. So, what country are you from?
I'm from Canada.
It's pretty cold there, eh?
Meet Erica the android. She or it, depending on who you ask, is one of the most sophisticated humanoids ever designed. And she's giving us a glimpse of what a year-million AI might look like.
Modern computers are adding machine. They add very fast, giving the illusion that they're thinking.
So this really is becoming the future. How far are we? We're not really that far. So, you know, the important thing is we will be able to, you know, maybe just about everything else got done. But, you know, to find love, I'm afraid you have to go to rishta.com. So with that, I really thank you for your attention and the opportunity to present. And I think, you know, I'll be happy to take any questions if anyone has. And I really thank also everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Syed. A wonderful, fascinating talk. The future looks very exciting and the possibilities appear endless. And clearly you're at the forefront of this. There are multiple questions from the audience, so we'll try and get through some of these if you're happy to take some questions now. I'll start with one. How do you envisage we're making these treatments and therapies cost effective for economically less developed countries and those areas and populations with limited access or availability to medical facilities?
So I think that's really a great question. So, you know, when the technology comes into market, it is always expensive. It's always difficult to really, you know, implement in centers that are not so well off. But I think as the time passes, I remember when I bought my first Apple computer, it was 2 megabyte Apple IIci, and I paid $12,000 for it. Now, actually, when you go to shopping, instead, you know, they give you free USBs, which are almost, you know, 8 gigabyte in memory. So I think the technologies, when they come initially, they are quite inexpensive and difficult to afford for many centers. But with actually, you know, when you see the benefit of these technologies, people start to adopt, they become commonplace, they become more affordable and easy to implement in centers that are really not well funded. So I think it really is also incumbent upon the governments to subsidize, you know, hospitals and to be able to really make sure that, from my perspective, if it puts a smile on a child's face and somebody could walk, someone can breathe easily, I think it's all really worth it. So, we can spend tons and tons of money on useless things, developing nuclear weapons and all of these weaponaries, and very little on healthcare provision. So I think in the beginning, all the technologies are really difficult to implement. They're costly, expensive, but as the time goes by, I think they become very easily affordable.
Fantastic. We have a question about Alzheimer's, given the increasing incidence of this, and any new technologies you think can help in that field of dementia or Alzheimer's.
So that's really, a great question again. So I think in terms of diagnostics, we are now predict 10 years in advance by just doing either the proteomics or the metabolomics analysis to be able to really predict if this individual is going towards really dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So these diagnostic approaches are really, taking us there and then helping us prepare better, use appropriate mental exercises, faculties, and what have you, to be able to slow down the progression. There is no cure, there is no treatment, we still manage. And I think with aging population, this will be the next tsunami. This is actually the next, coronavirus kind of, pandemic that is about to hit us. So I think, could we genetically predict? We don't really know what actually goes on. We know the tau protein, we know fibrillary entanglement, all those kinds of things are secondary. We don't know the actual cause, what causes them. So I think understanding the fundamental mechanisms, my lab has identified a gene, which is MEN1, which is actually a tumor suppressor. And surprisingly, we found it to control cholinergic synaptogenesis in the hippocampus. This is where learning and memory occurs, and this is where cognitive functions are perturbed. So I think from genetic profilings to early detection and predictability, and then designing devices to help these patients stimulate their parts of their brain is perhaps the best thing on the horizon for now.
Excellent. We have a question actually about Professor Stephen Hawkins, which was an interesting personality with access to data and technology that people hadn't seen in those decades before. And could you explain how that technology worked, and is it similar to your technology?
So it's again really brain computer interfacing, whereby he could really and it takes a lot of practice and individual practice to pair themselves, just like you have a dog or a horse that you train, you actually train with them. So the same thing is, he was able to really enhance those faculties, the signals, a lot more louder than you and I, because brain power was shifted towards more contemplative and imaginary centers, rather than the physical aspects that the unconscious part of our brain scans 1.2 million frames per second, whereas the conscious part only does 40 some frames. So what in his case had happened was, just like, Neuralink had recently developed these brain chips. They were implanted in pigs, Elon Musk, and they starved these pigs. And then when the olfactory bulb discharged, they had the chip there. And then the chip actually picked up the activity when the pig started to smell the food. So, their olfactory system, because it discharged, at mass, that was a lot easier to pick. So in his case, because his brain power, faculty was really enriched in that particular area, it was a lot easier for him to connect to these, computers and parts with lifetime practice. And that made him actually very interactive with these devices. And I think it is by force in cases when your brain is really forced to do things, it starts to really believe in aspects that are your mirror neurons in your brain actually fire. And when these mirror neurons fire, you can couple them with any device, and that will mirror, just like a monkey copies monkey sees, monkey copies. So these mirror neurons on the right side, this is also where your faith is actually resides. So I think in his case, all these faculties were really enhanced to that level that it was easier for him to interface with these computer devices.
Excellent. There's a couple of questions about the ethics and the moral side of things, which I think is very interesting. So what's your feeling about gene editing or the technology that you've been working on not being used for medical purposes, but be used in unfair advantages or intellect or other sort of situations?
That's an interesting question. You know, I get asked this question every time I go to the United States, because at the airport is my picture and they say, you know, it has our chip and it says, who knew University of Calgary will be home of brain chip technology? So what happens is every time I go, these guys pull me over and says, well, doctor, what if your technology has gotten into the hands of, I said, look, these guys are far ahead of me. They don't need any of my technology. They're already blowing up themselves up. So somebody has manipulated their brains and they control their brains completely. So I think, you know, it is too early to really contemplate any potential kind of misuse of these technologies. But I think we scientists and the doctors and scholars, we are very conscious of those kinds of things, whereby actually we would like to do something that will benefit humanity for health's sake, and then appropriate measures, the ethics could be put in place, you know, to get clinical clearance. It was a you know, whole new world for us. They will not let you touch the human brain, you know, and because what happens is that even when we use transcranial magnetic stimulation for these kids who are, you know, ADHD, they have hyperactivity, they have you know, autism spectrum. When we stimulate the parts, specific, you know, centers of the brain, we stop them from doing all these things. But I always worry that we may alter brain at some different areas as well. So we don't know, the collateral damage could be at other places. So those are really the immediate concerns for us, not whether this technology could be really hijacked, you know, and applied. And does it have the potential? Absolutely. Will we ever let this happen? Absolutely not.
Brilliant. There's a question here about operations for the brain, like large lobectomies or leucotomies in head injuries. Do you think your technology or technology around the brain would replace large operations where you can use smaller surgery or smaller procedures and get the same results?
So that, again, really a wonderful question. So, you know, the intra-operative robotic surgeries are being done here at our center. And Dr. Garnet Sutherland, he's a neurosurgeon, is a good friend. His lab is right next to mine. He has developed this really technology that allows them to be able to perform surgeries completely by a robot, which is inside the magnet, and he sits in a very different room. So I think and this is, we are talking about removing gliomas, you know, those tumors that are so sensitive. And if it is close to metacerebral artery, you damage it, there is stroke, and that's the game over. So, you know, we hope that these robots won't become Edward Scissorhand, you know, it goes and makes the brain masala instead of really, you know, fixing the problem. But I think for minor surgeries, that is already being done, you know, using these robotic devices, and the robots are performing surgeries. We're putting in stunts, so we put, you know, all those kinds of things. But I think whether human haptic could always be recapitulated, you know, by these devices, we're getting there, but we are not there.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, and I think for the final question, and apologies to the questions that we haven't asked, someone's asked, how should we prepare ourselves for the future? How should the medics of today prepare ourselves for what the future is going to bring, and what will happen to doctors, and how do we prepare for the digital revolution that's currently undertaking place?
So again, really a wonderful question. And the whole really idea behind this particular webinar was to make you uncomfortable. And uncomfortable that, you know, the world is going to change, but, you know, change we must embrace. We cannot stay in the old narrative and the old paradigm that is still being used in remote areas and certain, underprivileged countries, where this lady goes to doctor and he says, "What's the problem?" And she goes, "Every time I move my hand, it hurts." And he says, "Don't move it then." So those kinds of things we need to really start to embrace. And it is threatening, it is scary, and it is often, I won't name the hospital. We really helped a large unit get these gadgets and the simulation facility built through funding from United States and Pakistan. That when I went to visit all of these simulation facilities where you actually simulate surgeries, you can bring in an engineer, you can bring in, use a fresh cadaver and plant, the cardiac pacemaker. Students, residents, fellows, doctors, surgeons, nurses, everybody in that simulation facility called Code Blue, they rush, and all of a sudden they don't know the person is alive or dead. Right? And then, they implant a cardiac pacemaker, the surgeon will implant it, and the engineer will say, "You know what, I could actually do it much better. I think we could modify it a bit more." And then the students can go back and then implant it, replant it. Orthopedic, same thing, is bone and joint. So the idea was to really build these so we reduce the errors that are made in a surgical suite, but also to have interdisciplinary teams come together to develop these novel technologies. So that really eliminates the fear of anything that is new, novel, exciting, and interesting. But if you are not on board with this, you will miss the boat. And I think for any professional to reach the pinnacle of their expertise in their profession, thinking forward is really what I will define as success herein. And then the success hereafter actually depends upon those qualities that we have been endowed, and we took those qualities and we took them to the utmost level. So, medicine, medication is for patient and people, not for profit. Profit always comes. Same thing is with the healing as well. I think, if we stop learning the process and understanding our own profession, we are being dishonest with our own self and also the population that we serve. So I think it's really important not to be afraid of. I think the best thing is to really jump right into, embrace it, love it, and what it will serve you back so you could actually serve the profession that you have taken the vow for.
I think that's great advice. Professor Syed, would you, the panel is asking if you could announce scholarship for SIVU students from developing countries for research in the lab?
So, we were really discussing about this, and Dr. Shabi is such a wonderful, humanist in addition to and being an intellectual and a leader in the community, is that we said that if anybody is really interested in what we do, we will be able to actually support 5, trainees or students who wish to do their master's or PhD. And also, I think we will provide the opportunity for them to do a rotation or a fellowship, as they become really interested in those technologies. And even if they are not fitting in our areas, we can always liaison them with others. So 5 fully paid scholarships, we will commit to these students. This year, we actually got 30 students sponsored from Pakistan, and they were fully paid for to do their PhDs in the United States and the rest of, the Canada as well. So I would like to make the announcement that we would like to support 5 students who are interested in master's or PhD coming from that particular university. You have to secure the admission. We will secure everything else.
Fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Sister Shifa. I want to personally say thank you to Professor Naweed. It's been an honor to moderate the session, and I've learned a lot personally myself. Well, Sister Shifa.
Yes, I'd just like to thank you so much. It was an amazing lecture, and we're so thankful to have you. Every time, you speak on behalf of for Imamia Medics International or now SIVU, we get so many requests to have you back. So inshallah, we'll have you again very, very soon. And I don't know if Dr. Shabi is there and he would like to say a few words. I would like to call him.
Yes, Shifa. Thank you, Shifa. Naveed, another masterpiece. I mean, that is expected of you. Of course, nothing less than that. Like Hassan Zaidi always says that, it's such a joy to listen to you. You learn so much. Every time you give us a talk, we learn. Anyway, coming back to the final question. Thank you for the scholarships, and we certainly like to avail of this opportunity to invite students from the developing countries to get in touch with SIVU through Shifa, and they will connect you with Professor Naveed's lab, and there might be a chance that you might get a scholarship there. Finally, Naveed, one question that I have a chapter that I have to write, and I had sent a request to you earlier on the modern innovative technology, the lecture exactly that you've given in the book called Encyclopedia of Islamic Medical Ethics. That was last year. Now we have 1.5 months to upload that lecture. I'll send you a prototype, a lecture that somebody has written, which you need to correct, and then you can improve it, and we'll upload it directly on the Encyclopedia website. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely, I'll be delighted to do anything. Also, I think I will urge you, and you were very kind, and actually I have mentioned you in that article that I have just now been accepted and coming out. I think that really brings the 8th century Islamic dominance in sciences for Jabir bin Hayyan when he came up the attributes of a scientist and the sciences, and then link it really with the current days as to what needs to be done to not only embrace these technologies, but also become the developer, use rather than being just a user. So Ibai, you are a beacon of light, and you are really the pillar of strength for all of us. There is nothing that we would not do for you. So at your humble servant, at your service.
Thank you, Naveed. I read that article. The magazine actually sent that article for review to me. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I learned this thing about giverish, for example, and things. Amazing article that you've written. I think it's due to be published because they have accepted and they were due to publish. Thank you once again, and God bless, and we'll see you soon. Inshallah, we'll invite you to London. Hussein Shabi is taking off IMI here, along with Hussein Raza. So hopefully one day we'll see you soon in UK. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz. Shifa, you have to announce anything for the future?
Yes, I just wanted to announce to our attendees that we'll continue our workshop and webinar series. On Saturday, March 6th, we have another webinar coming up at 11 a.m. GMT, so back to our normal time, with Dr. Suleiman Ahmedi. He'll be speaking on technical and vocational education and training. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Naweed, and thank you, Dr. Hussein Shabi, for moderating, and lots of exciting announcements to share with our membership going forward about the scholarships. So thank you, and we hope to see everyone again in 2 weeks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.